Welcome back, everybody, to what in the world is going on today in markets and the global economy, and what the heck is going on with trade. So let's find out. There's some pretty interesting stories today on the market. The Trump administration announcing fees for Chinese ships coming to the U.S., Chinese-built ships to be specific, not just Chinese ships, and U.S. stocks going lower today, as you can see, because of what Trump is threatening to the Federal Reserve. There's lots of pension funds, foreign investors, and people that are pulling back or minimizing their investments in the United States. Now, this likely will cause some amount of permanent reduction in the multiples that the S&P 500 can potentially see in the future. Less money will flow into U.S. assets, and that'll mean that the stocks will pretty much never be able to get the same multiples. And lastly, we're going to be talking about China, some new EV technology that they are showing. The volatility is back up again. The VIX is up 20% today. The US dollar is taking another hit, and this one is especially interesting, and it kind of leads into one of the topics for today, and that is that Trump has basically been threatening to remove Powell from office as the Fed chair, which is technically something he can't do, but he seems to find a way to be able to do things he's not supposed to be able to do. And he has started to call Jerome Powell Mr. Too Late. So, as soon as someone gets a nickname that they're going to get relentlessly bullied, aggressively saying to Powell that he should lower interest rates. I think the thinking in his mind is that if interest rates get lowered, then people will feel better about having cheap and easy money, and then more investment will happen. Or maybe he just saw that, when interest rates were lower after COVID, there were lots of jobs. I don't know what the motivation behind it is. When you cut interest rates, it's generally because you need economic growth to be stimulated a little bit, because the lending is too high and money is not circulating in the economy as well as it could be. The Fed doesn't really seem to be very interested in following what Trump is saying, as they should be. They're supposed to be a separate entity and not influenceable by the president. If the Fed chair gets removed and then Trump puts someone in that just follows whatever he says, when you have high tariffs and low interest rates, that can lead to inflation, if not hyperinflation. So if all of those things come to pass, it's bad for the stability of the US dollar, it's bad for trust in the US monetary system, and the markets are rightfully so reacting negatively to all of this. So going on this same kind of track about cutting interest rates would lead to more inflation, people being able to spend more money on those goods. Similarly, the administration announced fees on Chinese ships docking at US ports. Now this is kind of insane. What they're proposing is fees up to as much as $1.5 million as part of a plan to bring ship manufacturing back to the U.S. The problem is that China manufactures 75 to 80% of all ships. And the knock-on effects of adding fees to a Chinese-built ship, not even if it's being operated by a different country or a different company from a different country, so many ships will not want to ship to the United States because it is going to become more and more expensive. And if fewer goods are coming into the United States, the price of what's left will go up. And they're considering exempting companies if they can show a shipbuilding order from a U.S. company within the next 3 years. Problematic because the U.S. only built 5 ships in 2022, shipping vessels specifically. The industry in the U.S. effectively doesn't exist, so I don't know how they are expecting all of these shipping companies on Chinese vessels to come in and just have magically appear in their hands an order to build a U.S. ship when there's about 1 or 2 suppliers who can accomplish that in the first place. There is no shipbuilding industry in the United States, and they're trying to basically revive it from the dead by adding fees to Chinese ships. To be fair, there are some shipbuilding companies in the US, but they majority build Navy vessels. They might be able to repurpose some of their construction to the shipping industry. This also brings up an interesting discussion of something called the Jones Act. This is a policy that's from like the 1930s in the United States. It makes it basically impossible to ship from one US port to another U.S. port unless you are on a U.S.-owned, U.S.-built, and U.S.-manned vessel. If you're on a cruise or something, for example, and you're leaving a U.S. port and one of your stops is going to be at another US port, say you're leaving from Washington State and you're going to Florida, you have to stop over in a different country first before going back to the US in order to circumvent the Jones Act. And the purpose of the Jones Act was to try and build up and maintain an in-house US shipbuilding industry. But all that has happened is people have found ways to circumvent the law, build ships in less expensive countries like China. The Jones Act ships cost twice as much to operate as non-Jones Act compliant ships, but all it has done is kind of led to a monopoly of one or two companies that control all of US shipping and that have slowly been dying as the years have gone on. You can see here the US shipbuilding total deadweight tonnage by year. There is nothing happening in these like COVID years and in 2024. So reviving it is not an overnight thing. It takes time and it takes investment. While you're doing that, you're going to have to rely on other countries to use their ships in order to actually have a flow of goods. By fining them, all you're doing is inflicting damage on your own consumers and your own country instead of trying to stimulate the shipbuilding industry. Urging the administration to reconsider this counterproductive measure, which risks harming U.S. consumers, manufacturers, and farmers without delivering meaningful progress towards revitalizing the U.S. maritime industry. That is basically summarizing everything that I spoke about. These fees are actually going to go into place as of April 17th, and they're going to get slowly increased as the years go on. Continuing on global economies in China and various other countries, we are starting to see a lot of countries are pulling out from private equity in the United States. This state-backed Chinese investment corporation is reducing or completely pulling out of some private equity investments that it made. They will no longer make new fund commitments to U.S. firms. They have been reducing this as the years have gone on in the past, so this is not like a new thing for them. But with Trump and all of these policies that are happening right now, they have just decided to completely pull the plug on it. They have a $4.7 trillion fund, and they used to own a stake in Blackstone, which they sold in 2018. They are among the world's biggest investors in alternative assets. Chinese investors have started to set up partnerships to invest in the UK, Saudi Arabia, France, Japan, Italy, to diversify its portfolio basically away from the US. So they have been doing this for a while, and you're seeing a similar thing happening from other countries like Canada and Denmark. The largest pension funds in Canada and Denmark. The Canada Pension Plan has 699 Canadian billion dollars in assets. They are rethinking investing in the United States, reduce their investment while they wait for things to become more certain. So this news about Canadian and Danish pension plans trying to reduce their exposure to the US led me to try and figure out why that was happening. And this article here talks about a potential tax change that would lead to a spike in costs for Canadians who invest in U.S. securities. So because we have a free trade agreement with the United States, we don't really have much of a tax burden investing in U.S. companies, and some of our tax advantaged accounts like the RRSP or retirement savings accounts, you don't actually pay any withholding tax to the U.S. if you're holding U.S. shares in those accounts. What they're proposing is an increase to the withholding tax rate in the United States, which basically just makes it more of a pain in the to invest in the US because you will have to file taxes on more of your investment accounts, mean that you have to pay more tax to the United States in order to invest in the United States. There is the potential that it could bring the withholding tax rate up to 50%. I was listening to someone who was talking about this on YouTube. If the withholding tax rate is 50%, it effectively eliminates any reasonable person's desire to invest in the United States as a Canadian, as an international investor. If this goes through, you're going to see a ton of Canadians likely shifting their asset holdings again outside of the US. And if you look at the market today, I'd say that's already been happening for quite a while. I mean, I personally am I'm not selling what I have in the US, but I am no longer buying in the US. But if something like this new withholding tax comes into place, that's going to hurt a lot of people tax-wise, and it's going to hurt the US again. All of this comes back around to hurting the US, destroying this era of US exceptionalism when it comes to being a place where money easily flows and people want to invest and spend their money in the US and invest in companies in the US. If all of this stuff comes through, it could have huge implications. Canadians hold $3 trillion of US securities at the end of December. This could lead to billions of dollars more in taxes, less money coming into the US, less money flowing into US assets, less premiums on those US assets, and the market as a whole in the US goes down. There are some long-term implications to passing a tax like this, and if the US is considering doing it to Canada, I'm sure they're also considering doing it to other countries that they have free trade agreements with. I really don't see anything positive coming out of the United States recently. It seems like they're on a mission to completely isolate themselves from the world, to completely destroy their quality of life, to completely ruin all of the industries that they have built up over time. And it's honestly kind of depressing to see, even though I am not an American. It's just like sad. Of all the countries that this is going to hurt the most, it will be the US. I'm going to go back to China really quickly and talk about this interesting article about how their company CATL says that it overtook BYD on 5-minute EV charging time. They have a new battery cell that can achieve 520 kilometer charge in 5 minutes. This is just an interesting article, and Chinese dominance in EV and battery technology. They have really leapfrogged the United States. The US only had one company kind of that was doing EV, and that's Tesla, and Tesla is not really in people's good books right now. I think this is another showcase of how China has just been slowly kind of taking away the lead from the United States in various industries, and it's especially true in EVs. Right now, 45% of all sales in China are either EV or plug-in hybrids. The same company, CATL, create a new car battery out of sodium ion rather than lithium ion, which is more readily available, easier to produce, has better temperature control ranges, so it works better at high and low temperatures. The problem with this technology before was that the battery density wasn't as good as lithium ion, but they're starting to improve the battery density of sodium ion. This can be beneficial for the world as a whole if other countries are able to develop this technology, because it would mean that there is less reliance on China for critical minerals like lithium. China is one of the largest critical mineral suppliers, if not the only critical mineral supplier in the world right now. All of the technology that's being developed in China, I think, eventually will come out to benefit the rest of the world. China is likely going to be one of the first major economies in the world to be fully electric. They are managing to really force their way to the front of the field when it comes to batteries and electric vehicles and various other industries that they are basically already number one in. Quickly at today's heat map, NVIDIA is taking a huge hit. They had a news article come out that they will no longer be able to sell this huge amount of chips that they already manufactured to China, their H20 chips. And this is going to seriously hurt NVIDIA's stock price and other chip makers' stock prices if they're no longer able to sell to China, which was one of their largest markets. Netflix, as I predicted, is doing okay compared to the rest of the market, which is down 3.5%. But Netflix is doing okay. They had decent earnings come through. They don't expect the trade war to impact them very much. But a lot of other companies, the big players, NVIDIA, Tesla, and all of the big tech companies are bringing down the indices today. Lots of earnings happening this week. The S&P 500 is having tons and tons of earnings. We have the Tesla earnings coming out on Tuesday. Their sales were down last time I heard, and I have a feeling that their earnings are not going to be great. I don't know if the decline in the stock today is already pricing that in. I'm expecting them to take a bit of a hit tomorrow. Tons and tons of other companies. There's Google on Thursday. I feel like I'm saying this every single time I come back up here, but as long as Trump and whoever are threatening the Fed, and people are worried about the United States, and the people willing to invest in the US dollar and trust the US dollar gets slowly eroded, gold is benefiting like crazy. We are on a down day today. I'm probably going to wait again towards the end of the day here, but I do think I'm going to be picking up a little bit more shares of the companies that I bought last week. The overall play for me, as per usual, is to try and diversify away from the United States until all of this blows over. If the market goes back into bull run territory at some distant point in the future, then there will be many opportunities to buy back into the United States. For the time being, things will probably get worse before they get better, so the green days will probably be very short-lived. Thanks for watching the video. Hopefully it was interesting or useful. And that's it for today. Thanks for listening to me ramble, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.